Morning, Mariam, Danielle, Kiki.
Hello, Mr.
Morning, Mother. Uh, Maya.
Good morning, Mr.
Morning, guys. Sam, Summer. Okay, Listen, and Autumn. So I have Minna, Mirna. Okay, Shahla Tamim. Peter. So far I have Danielle, Mariam, Kiki, Summer, Matar, Maya, Basant, Yauta, Minna, Mirna, Shahla Tamim, and Peter.
Hello, Mr.
Morning, morning, Matar. Omar and Rashwan. Omar, Rashwan, Hanya.
Good morning, Mr.
Morning, morning, Rashwan. Happy birthday, Rashwan. Dahrub.
Thank you, Mr.
Morning, Mr.
So there are 16 students in the room right now, waiting for the others to join us. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 16. Yes, there are 16. Dahrug, Matar, Danielle, Mariam, Maya, Minna, Mirna, Kiki, Omar, Basant, Peter, Rashwan, Samar, Yauta, Hania, and Shah Tamim. Okay. Thank you very much for being on time, guys. If you remember last time or yesterday, we started A Tale of Two Cities, a novel written by Charles Dickens. And as I told you yesterday in the mail, we will have some discussion. We're not going to read the whole chapters because this will take time. I found a video on the internet which reads the whole chapter 2 and chapter 3 in 11 and 12 or 11 and 13 minutes. We'll try to play these videos, but after we explain them, let's just have some revision on what we did yesterday. Can you remind me of the number of copies A Tale of Two Cities sold so far?
Mr.
Minna?
200 million.
Okay. 200 million. Put your hand up, please, before you answer. Sorry, Danielle. Okay. So the book or this title sold 200 million copies, which means it's the best seller, as far as I know, in history. Mirna. Mirna, you want to say something, or you raised
Can
your
you
hand?
please admit? Can you please admit Nada?
Nada?
Yes.
Actually, it isn't the best seller.
It isn't the best. Okay, can you add your information, Bassam? Thank you.
It's another novel. I can't exactly say it, but it sold over 500 million copies.
Good. Oh my God. Thank you very much. I have Jana, Nada, and Shahd Ibrahim. Thank you, Bassam. Bassam says another title. So this comes second or what? Bassam?
Yes.
Did they say that it comes second or something like that? Luigi?
Yes, it is the second most sold novel.
So according to Bassam, it's the second bestseller ever. It sold more than 200 million copies. Okay, so another question. The Tale of Two Cities, A Tale of Two Cities is one title with how many books? Within the same novel, we have a couple of books. How many books does it have? Put your hands up, please. I have Minna, Peter, Mirna, the usual guys who raise their hands. What about the others? I have 21 students in the room, guys. The question is, how many books does A Tale of Two Cities have? How many books? It's one book, but within this book, there are a couple of books. How many? Luigi?
3 books.
3 books. Book the first, as the writer calls it, or the first book. Do you remember how many chapters are there in book 1, or book the first, or the first book?
6.
6, thank you. And we said we're going to do them quickly this week. They are about 44 pages, just to have an idea, or it's like an introduction to the story itself. Okay, another question. Can you summarize what happened in chapter 1? Are there any characters mentioned in chapter 1? Yes or no? Peter? Peter?
Yes, Mister.
Yes. There are any characters mentioned in chapter 1, book 1, chapter 1?
I remember characters, but I couldn't really remember their name.
Okay. Luigi, do you want to answer this question?
I don't think there were characters mentioned.
I didn't get your answer. Did you say yes or no?
Can you hear me?
Can I what? You want that question
Can you?
again?
No, خلاص يا مستر. Sorry.
Luigi, no problem. Myrna? Were any characters mentioned in chapter 1, book 1, chapter 1?
No.
No. So it was just as an introduction. طيب, Omar, can you summarize chapter 1? Can you tell us what it is about? Omar, are you raising your hand? Omar, can you hear me? Okay, I lower your hand. طيب, who can summarize chapter 1? Book 1, chapter 1. Hello? Who can summarize? Book 1, chapter 1. I have Minna only. Who else? Hania, are you there? Hania?
Yes.
Did you attend yesterday's session?
Yes, I did.
Okay. طيب, listen to Minna. Minna will summarize chapter 1.
It describes the era of England and France in the 1775. It describes that it was the best time and the worst time. The best time for aristocrats. They were forcing people to do bad things, I assume, and worst time for people because there were many hungers and slavery, and many of the poor died and couldn't have rights or anything.
Yeah, thank you very much. The chapter talked about the situation at that time in 1775, and the writer described, or the narrator described the situation in England and the situation in France at the same time. He said that both were monarchies. There was a king and a queen here, and the king and a queen, here. A king with a big jaw here, and a king with a big jaw here, a plain-faced queen here, and a fair-faced queen here. And the rich people, as Minna mentioned, were having their best time. They were living, or they living in pleasure, and they were having fun, and they were oppressing the poor people all the time. On the other hand, the lower classes were suffering, were poor, were hungry most of the time. Thank you very much, Minna. Okay, today we're going to do chapter 2, or chapters 2 and 3. And I have a video here. I think it's a 13-minute video. So if you have that copy in front of you, I sent it to you. Wait, I sent it to you and asked you to download it. Can you open it, please? Or I can open it from here for you to follow. This is chapter 2. Can you see the title, guys?
No, not yet.
Okay, I haven't shared it yet. Let's see, sorry. Yes, it's here. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Yes.
Chapter.
Admit Mr. Hamid. Mr. Hamid is late. Hamid, good morning.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam. Were you okay yesterday, Hamid, because you were absent?
أنا كنت إيه yesterday؟
I called your name, you didn't answer. مش فاكر؟ طيب no problem. اوكي انتوا عارفين ان في ريكورد دلوقتي واتبعت الغياب
بتاعت الدكتور بس يا مستر. بتاعت الدكتور.
اوكي شافك الله وعافاك. Are you okay now?
Yes.
Alhamdulillah. Okay, so this is chapter 2, Hamid. We are doing A Tale of Two Cities. We did chapter 1 yesterday. Book 1, chapter 1. Today
أيوة, I know, I did it.
We're doing chapter 2 and 3, inshallah. The title of chapter 2 is The Mail. Okay, The Mail. It's a mail carriage or a mail couch. You know, a couch in the past, now a couch is a big bus, right? A coach, sorry. A coach is a big bus, but in the past it was like a carriage, a cart pulled by a couple of horses, maybe a cart or a carriage and two, a carriage and three, a carriage and two horses, 3 horses, sometimes a carriage and 6. Okay, sometimes 6 horses pulled the same carriage. Mail at that time was sent using these or such carriages, and at the same time it was a means of transportation. Yani such mail carriages used to transfer people from a place to another, and letters or messages at the same time. Mail carriage from London to Dover. We saw yesterday where Dover is. Dover is a coastal town, a coastal English town, okay, which is somehow the nearest English town to France. Okay, on the other side in France, there is the town of Calais. A mail coach was traveling or going up a hill from London to Dover. This is a highway at that time. And we said yesterday that roads were full of robberies, right? Robberies all the time. In the cart or in this carriage, there were 3 passengers or a couple of passengers, including Mr. Lorry. Who can tell me who Mr. Lorry is? We studied the characters yesterday. Mirna, thank you very much, Mirna. Wallahi, indeed. Thank you, guys who raise their hands all the time. Thank you very much indeed. Go ahead, Mirna.
I think he was the character who dug graves to get out dead bodies and sell them to medical
Not exactly.
students.
He used to work for Telson's bank. Yes, the other character used to work for Telson's bank. Laurie also works for the bank, but he's a banker. This is the man who looked after Lucy Manette when her father was Dr. Manette was put in prison back in France, and her mother died when she was young. Okay, so he was like the advisor and the guardian of Lucy Manette. Thank you, Mary. Thank you very much. So the man was traveling by this mail carriage, and Mr. Cruncher, another person who works at the bank, on a horse, gallops, and the people in this carriage hear the hoofs of the horse galloping, and they all are afraid. At that time, because of the robberies on the highway all the time, the people in the carriage were afraid of each other and afraid of anyone else. Okay, for all the people were afraid. Can you hear me, guys? Because I have a message that my internet is not stable. Can you hear me well?
No, we can hear you.
Yes.
Can you hear me now? Hello? Okay.
Yes.
So in this carriage, there were 3 types of people. The coachman, okay, himself, a guard, there was a guard. In front of him, there were some weapons in a chest, and the passengers. One of the passengers was Mr. Jarvis Lorry. Again, who is Mr. Jarvis Lorry? A banker who works for Telson's Bank in London, and he is the guardian and advisor of Lucy Manette. He looked after her after her father was imprisoned for, do you remember how many years Dr. Manette was imprisoned in the Bastille back in Paris for? Myrna?
18.
18 years. Okay, thank you very much. So this chapter, it's a long chapter. It's about 8 or 9 pages. Describe this, revolves around this. Okay, the man on the horse asks for a Mr. Lorry. The coachman asks for Mr. Lorry. Mr. Lorry, all the people were afraid that this is a gangster or someone or a bandit or someone who came to rob them or do something like that. But Mr. Lorry recognized Mr. Cruncher, and Mr. Cruncher had a message for him. The message said, Mamselle, or the lady is waiting at Dover. He answers with 3 words, recall to life. At the time when this novel was published, the novels were serialized and published every week, as we said yesterday. The writer needed to keep you as a reader, okay, involved in the actions, attracted to the action, and he gives you some enigmatic, let's say, hints to keep you or to attract your attention or to get you stuck to this or make you wait for the next week until you know the plot or the plot is resolved step by step. Okay, فهير the answer was recall to life. What does this symbolize, this secret answer, which confused the messenger? Maybe it means that Mr. Manette or Dr. Manette, who's been in prison for Whitman, who's been in prison for about 18 years now, will come back to life because the man lost his memory and was just making shoes in the prison. All he remembered when you ever asked him about his name, he would say 105 North Tower. This is the room in which he was imprisoned. He forgot even his name. Maybe this implies this man's rebirth. He was reborn again, okay, coming back to life. Another meaning may be Sidney Carton. I want you to remind me of who Sidney Carton is. We talked about Sidney Carton yesterday. Sidney Carton. I have Minna's hand. Minna?
He is a drunk lawyer
Perfect.
who looks like Lucy's husband.
Yes.
Justin Darno.
Thank you very much. He was a dissolute person. He led a dissolute life. All he did was, let's say, drinking, womanizing, and wasting his money. He was cynical. He didn't like himself. He was a self-loathing person. Like a dead person. He was living like a dead person, but he was, again, rebirthed in another meaning when he fell in love with Lucy. Although his love wasn't requited, as we studied in the collocations in the first term, or maybe last year. His love was not requited. It wasn't returned, right? He fell in love with her, and this made him something like, we say, some type of spiritual rebirth. Instead of being a dissolute person, living a drunk person, wasting his money and doing such and such, he became ready to sacrifice his life for a person Lucy loves. Why? Because he was in love with Lucy. Okay, maybe this made him a valuable person after he was sentenced to death using the guillotine, as we said yesterday. I think we took much time doing this. This is the situation in this chapter, just the idea of delivering the message and receiving the message back, and all the other stuff is just not important thing. I'll play the video and tell me if you can follow up in your copies if you have printed them, and please please, if you haven't printed them yet, get them printed, okay, and follow up in the
mail. It was the Dover Road that lay on a Friday night late in November before the first of the persons with whom this history has business.
Can you hear?
Yes.
Okay.
The Dover Road lay, as to him, beyond the Dover Mail, as it lumbered up Shooter's Hill. He walked uphill in the mire by the side of the mail, as the rest of the passengers did, not because they had the least relish for walking exercise, under the circumstances, but because the hill and the harness and the mud and the mail were all so heavy that the horses had 3 times already come to a stop, besides once drawing the coach across the road with the mutinous intent of taking it back to Blackheath. Reins and whip and coachman and guard, however, in combination, had read that article of war, which forbade a purpose otherwise strongly in favor of the argument that some brute animals are endued with reason. And the team had capitulated and returned to their duty. With drooping heads and tremulous tails, they mashed their way through the thick mud, floundering and stumbling between whiles, as if they were falling to pieces at the larger joints. As often as the driver rested them and brought them to a stand, with a wary, "Whoa-ho, so-ho then," the near leader violently shook his head and everything upon it, like an unusually emphatic horse, denying that the coach could be got up the hill. Whenever the leader made this rattle, the passenger started, as a nervous passenger might, and was disturbed in mind. There was a steaming mist in all the hollows, and it had roamed in its forlornness up the hill like an evil spirit, seeking rest and finding none. A clammy and intensely cold mist, it made its slow way through the air in ripples that visibly followed and overspread one another, as the waves of an unwholesome sea might do. It was dense enough to shut out everything from the light of the coach lamps, but these its own workings, and a few yards of road, and the reek of the laboring horses steamed into it, as if they made it ill.
Sorry, guys. So the writer here is describing the foggy, the misty weather, which added to their, let's say, fear. They were frightened of each other. They were wary of each other and all the other guys. Again, why? Because robberies were common at that time, according to what we have studied in chapter 1 on highways. For everybody, the 3 passengers were afraid of each other. They were afraid of the coachman. They were afraid of the guard. The guard was afraid of the coachman. The guard was afraid of the passengers, and so on. Everybody is wary of the other guys with them, and any other guy who were or guys who were riding horses on the road, and so on. All the people were afraid of each other and one another. Okay. What added to this? What added to this problem is the bad weather. It was foggy, nobody could see anything. Okay, this made them more and more frightened. Okay.
Mr. who are the 3
Sorry?
the 3 passengers?
Excuse me?
Who are the 3 passengers again?
I can't
The
hear.
3 passengers.
The 3, we know that one of them is Mr. Lorry. We don't care about the others, just passengers, okay? One of them is Mr.
And
Lorry.
where they going?
Peter?
Yes.
You were asking about something?
Yes, where were they going?
From London to Dover. They were just passengers. Okay? We don't have anything in detail, Peter. Who sent this message to Mr. Lorry? We don't know. Who was the response or the reply taken to? We don't know. Okay? Again, what we want to know here is that Mr. Lorry received a message that says, Mamselle, or Mademoiselle en français, Mamselle is waiting at Dover. He answered, recalled to life. Okay, this is what we know, or what this is the most important thing. This is the core of this chapter. Sorry.
Okay.
All 3 were wrapped to the cheekbones and over the ears and wore jack boots. Not one of the 3 could have said, from anything he saw, what either of the other 2 was like, and each was hidden under almost as many wrappers from the eyes of the mind as from the eyes of the body of his 2 companions. In those days, travelers were very shy of being confidential on a short notice, for anybody on the road might be a robber or in league with robbers. As to the latter, when every posting house and alehouse could produce somebody in the captain's pay, ranging from the landlord to the lowest stable nondescript, it was the likeliest thing upon the cards. So, the guard of the Dover Mail bought to himself that Friday night in November 1775 lumbering up Shooter's Hill, as he stood on his own particular perch behind the mail, beating his feet and keeping an eye and a hand on the arm chest before him, where a loaded blunderbuss lay at the top of 6 or 8 loaded horse pistols, deposited on a substratum of cutlass. The Dover mail was in its usual genial position, that the guard suspected the passengers suspected one another and the guard, they all suspected everybody else, and the coachman was sure of nothing but the horses. As to which cattle,
I'd like to stop here. Sorry. Let's read this paragraph again. The Dover mail, or the Dover mail coach, was in its usual genial position, that the guard suspected the passengers, the guard suspected the passengers, the passengers suspected one another, and the guard at the same time, they all suspected everybody else, and the coachman was sure of nothing but the horses. He trusted just the horses. As to which cattle he could with a clear conscience have taken his oath on the 2 testaments that they were not fit for the journey. Even the horses were not fit for the journey, but he trusted them. The only thing he trusted were the 2 horses. Okay, let's go on.
he could, with a clear conscience, have taken his oath on the 2 testaments that they were not fit for the journey. Whoa, ho, said the coachman. So then, one more pull and you're at the top, and be damned to you, for I've had trouble enough to get you to it. Joe? Hello, the guard replied. What o'clock do you make it, Joe? 10 minutes good, past 11. My blood, ejaculated the vexed coachman. And not atop of Shooters yet. Psst, get on with you. The emphatic horse, cut short by the whip, in a most decided negative, made a decided scramble for it, and the 3 other horses followed suit. Once more the Dover mail struggled on, with the jackboots of its passengers squashing along by its side. They had stopped when the coach stopped, and they kept close company with it. If any one of the 3 had had the hardihood to propose to another to walk on a little ahead into the mist and darkness, he would have put himself in a fair way of getting shot instantly as a highwayman. The last burst carried the mail to the summit of the hill. The horses stopped to breathe again, and the guard got down to skid the wheel for the descent, and opened the coach door to let the passengers in. Joe, cried the coachman in a warning voice, looking down from his box. What do you say, Tom? They both listened. I say a horse and a canter coming up, Joe. I say a horse and a gallop, Tom, returned the guard, leaving his hold of the door and mounting nimbly to his place. Gentlemen, in the king's name, all of you.
So when they heard that a horse running behind them, galloping, the hooves, when they heard the sound of the hooves of the horse, they were startled, they were frightened, okay?
With this hurried adjuration, he cocked his blunderbuss and stood on the offensive. The passenger booked by this history was on the coach step getting in. The 2 other passengers were close behind him, about to follow. He remained on the step, half in the coach and half out of it. They remained in the road below him. They all looked from the coachman to the guard, from the guard to the coachman, and listened. The coachman looked back, and the guard looked back, and even the emphatic leader pricked up his ears and looked back without contradicting. The stillness consequent on the cessation of the rumbling and laboring of the coach, added to the stillness of the night, made it a very quiet indeed. The panting of the horses communicated a tremulous motion to the coach, as if it were in a state of agitation. The hearts of the passengers beat loud enough, perhaps, to be heard, but at any rate, the quiet pause was audibly expressive of people out of breath, and holding the breath, and having the pulses quickened by expectation. The sound of a horse at a gallop came fast and furiously up the hill. So, ho! The guard sang out, as loud as he could roar, You there, stand, I shall fire! The pace was suddenly checked, and with much splashing and floundering, a man's voice called from the mist, Is that the Dover mail? Never you mind what it is, the guard retorted. What are you? Is that the Dover Mail? Why do you want to know? I want a passenger if it is. What passenger? Mr. Jarvis Lorry? Our booked passenger showed in a moment that it was his name. The guard, the coachman, and the two other passengers eyed him distrustfully. Keep where you are, the guard called to the voice in the mist, because if I should make a mistake, it could never be set right in your lifetime. Gentlemen of the name of Lorry, answer straight. What is the matter? Asked the passenger then, with mildly quavering speech. Who wants me? Is it Jerry? I don't like Jerry's voice if it is Jerry, growled the guard to himself. He's hoarser than suits me, is Jerry. Yes, Mr. Lorry. What is the matter? A dispatch sent after you from over yonder, T&Co. I know this messenger, guard, said Mr. Lorry, getting down into the road, assisted from behind, more swiftly than politely, by the other two passengers, who immediately scrambled into the coach, shut the door, and pulled up the window. He may come close, there's nothing wrong. I hope there ain't, that I can make so nation sure of that, said the guard in gruff soliloquy. Hello, you. Well, and hello, you, said Jerry, more hoarsely than before. Come on at the foot-pace, do you mind me? And if you got holsters to that saddle of yourn, don't let me see your hand go nigh 'em, for I'm a devil at a quick mistake, and when I make one, it takes the form of lead. So now let's look at you. The figures of a horse and rider came slowly through the eddying mist, and came to the side of the mail where the passenger stood. The rider stooped, and, casting up his eyes at the guard, handed the passenger a small folded paper. The rider's horse was blown, and both horse and rider were covered with mud, from the hooves of the horse to the hat of the man.
Sorry, guys. So this is again the situation in which the message was delivered. Here we have the word dispatch here. I saw the word dispatch. Dispatch means a message, as you know, and dispatch means send. A message was dispatched. Okay, and the rider is Mr. Roger Cruncher. Mr. Cruncher delivers the message. Mr. Lorry swoops down. He leaves the carriage, and the two other passengers were afraid that this would be the accomplice of, or his partner. Maybe they made a plan to rob us this way, for they were still afraid of this man on the horse. The figures of a horse and the rider came slowly after the guard was sure this message was for Mr. Lorry. Through the eddying mist, it was misty, as we said, and came to the side of the mail where the passenger stood. Mr. Lorry stood. Okay, the rider stooped. Okay, he went down and casting up his eyes at the guard, handed Mr. Lorry a small folded paper. The rider's horse was blown. The horse was extremely tired. The horse was panting and breathing quickly. It was exhausted, and both horse and rider were covered with mud because it was a late November night. You know, in November in England, it's wet all the time, from the hooves of the horse to the head of the man. Yani the rider and the horse were covered in mud from the hooves of the horse to the head of the man. Can you imagine it? Okay. Both the horse and the rider were in mud. From the hoof to the head of the man.
God, said the passenger in a tone of quiet business confidence. The watchful guard, with his right hand at the stock of his raised blunderbuss, his left at the barrel, and his eye on the horseman, answered curtly, Sir, there is nothing to apprehend. I belong to Tellson's Bank. You must know Tellson's Bank in London. I am going to Paris on business. A crown to drink. I may read this. If so be as you're quick, sir. He opened it in the light of the coach lamp on that side and read, first to himself and then aloud. Wait at Dover for Mademoiselle. It's not long, you see, God. Jerry, say that my answer was recalled to life. Jerry started in his saddle.
So this is the most important point, or the most important lines in the whole chapter. He opened it, Mr. Lorry, after taking the message or the dispatch from Mr. Cruncher, he opened it in the light of the coach lamp on that side and read. First to himself, he read it first silently to himself and then aloud. The message reads, wait at Dover for Mamselle, await at Dover for Mamselle. It's not long. You see, guard, it's not long. Because the guard was afraid of the horse rider. Again, he asked the guard for permission to read the message. The guard thought that the message was a long letter that would take 10 minutes or 15 minutes or something. But at the end, he permitted or allowed Mr. Lorry to read the message. The message is thus just these 4 or 5 or 6 words. Wait at Dover for Mamselle. Okay, so it's not long, you see, guard. Jerry say that my answer was recall to life. And this is the answer, just 3 words. He took no time, okay, to read the message and to reply to it. Recall to life. And we said this symbolizes 2 things. Again, the rebirth of Dr. Manette after being imprisoned or buried in prison for 18 years, during which he lost his memory. He forgot his name. He forgot his profession. He was a doctor, a physician. But in the prison, he was a shoemaker. He was making shoes and fixing shoes all the time. So this is the rebirth, or symbolizes the rebirth of Dr. Manette. Another way, it acted like, let's say, a spiritual awakening of Sidney Carton. He was leading a dissolute life in which he was drinking, womanizing, and wasting his money. Okay, and he came back to life by being sentenced to death to, let's say, or due to his love for Lucy Manette. Okay, guys, are you following up?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Go on. Okay.
Yes.
We still have about just 3 minutes.
That's a blatant strange answer too, said he at his horses. Take that message back. They will know that I received this as well as if I wrote. Make the best of your way. Good night. With those words, the passenger opened the coach door and got in, not at all assisted by his fellow passengers, who had expeditiously secreted their watches and purses in their boots, and were now making a general pretense of being asleep, with no more definite purpose than to escape the hazard of originating any other kind of action. The coach lumbered on again, with heavier wreaths of mist closing round it as it began the descent. The guard soon replaced his blunderbuss in his arm chest, and having looked to the rest of its contents, and having looked to the supplementary pistols that he wore in his belt, looked to a smaller chest beneath his seat, in which there were a few smith's tools, a couple of torches, and a tinder box. For he was furnished with that completeness, that if the coach lamps had been blown and stormed out, which did occasionally happen, he had only to shut himself up inside, keep the flint and steel sparks well off the straw, and get a light with tolerable safety and ease, if they were lucky, in 5 minutes. Tom, softly over the coach roof. Hello, Joe. Did you hear that message? I did, Joe. What did you make of it, Tom? Nothing at all, Joe. That's coincidence, too, the guard mused, for I made the same of it myself. Jerry, left alone in the mist and darkness, dismounted meanwhile, not only to ease his spent horse, but to wipe the mud from his face and shake the wet out of his hat brim, which might be capable of holding about half a gallon. After standing with the bridle over his heavily splashed arm until the wheels of the mail were no longer within hearing, and the night was quite still again,